Sasuke was experiencing something that he hardly ever got to in a long time. It was a calm dream, a memory. Ichi had come home after a long mission and he couldn't wait to go with him and watch him train as they usually did. He hopped onto his brother's back and they went to the training fields and he just stood on the sidelines watching him practice for a while till they had to go back home. He closed his eyes and was now standing outside the compound with Ichi standing next to him. "I'll see you soon, little brother," Ichi said as he got on one knee and hugged Sasuke. He hugged Ichi tighter, but in this constant calm memory, he felt deep sadness and not anger for the first time and slowly opened his eyes. He was holding onto something no someone tightly and could feel the wetness in his eyes even though he hadn't cried. After looking around he remembered his and Kakashi's little adventure yesterday and slowly looked up to what he was holding and saw his white-haired sensei, well, part of him. His head was being obscured by his white hair that seemed to have gotten loose during the night. Sasuke wanted to see under the mask again just to sate his own curiosity and ensure that he hadn't imagined what he saw yesterday, even though he was very sure. His arms were still wrapped around Kakashi and he wasn't holding his back, so he assumed he was probably still sleeping. Slowly he inched over Kakashi's form, resting his forearm on his chest to give himself some balance. As he was still worn out himself, he pushed the hair out of Kakashi's face rather easily and without any disturbance and just stared at his masked face for a while. The Uchiha made his resolve and slowly reached out to the mask, and mourning to you too, Sasuke heard, forcing him to freeze as he saw Kakashi's eyes slowly open. I was Jew. His mumbling was stopped by Kakashi's grabbing his hand and slowly pulling it towards his mask. It seemed agonizingly long for the Uchiha, but Kakashi guided his hand without breaking eye contact to take off the mask. It slid off easily and once again Sasuke was now staring at his face and taking it in. At the dinner, he had only gotten side glances at it and he didn't want to appear too suspicious to Mrs. Misono, so he had limited his glancing. The hand he used to take off the mask dragged its way back up to feel his features and Kakashi could see it in his eyes as if Sasuke was putting them to memory. Sasuke could feel around Kakashi's face all the small bruises he had sustained the day before and some invisible scars unknown to the naked eye. With each small bump, he found he looked back into Kakashi's eyes. It was different from before and a lot less terrifying than it used to be, which he thought was abnormal. Take a picture, it will last longer. He felt Sasuke shift on his chest and he already knew he was preparing to bolt, but he quickly reached out, wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling him down to his chest. "Nice try." Sasuke only let out a small chuckle with a huff. "Hey, you offered." They remained in silence for a while, with Sasuke resting his head on Kakashi's chest with his eyes closed till he broke the quiet. "Tell me about you." Before this, Sasuke asked randomly, and he quickly felt a small jolt from Kakashi, one that his sensei would normally never let happen. "Is he letting his guard down around me?" His sensei let out a dry chuckle. "Not much to talk about," Kakashi said flatly and was quickly met with a punch to his side. "Oh, easy there." Sasuke just ignored him, proceeding to point across the room at a wall where there was an Anbu mask. It looked as if it was watching over Kakashi's bed. "Oh, that little display piece." Kakashi saw Sasuke's hand reach up and clamp down on his cheek. "Baka, you're sounding more like the Dobi, so just give it to me straight." Kakashi let out a deep huff. "Fine, but you owe me a new novel. I was in the Anbu for as long as I can remember." Sasuke, wanting to know every detail, opened his eyes and propped himself up on Kakashi's chest and looked at his face for any deception. He wasn't going to let anything get past him, and it was my way to forget. At least that's what I thought at the time. It's easier to be a cog in a bigger machine, so you can better hide your wear and tear. Something else had been bugging him. "I have seen that mask before." He had a small scrunch on his brow, which Kakashi immediately noticed. and yes, you did see me before. Just before. Kakashi looked away as Sasuke connected the dots, and in an instant, he could remember, when sometimes Ichi had been escorted back home by some Anbu, even if Ichi liked calling it the VIP treatment, and he noted seeing that mask very vividly because he only saw it a few times, and by the look on Kakashi's face it was him. Does that mean you worked with him? The words came out choked as if he had been struggling to get them out. Kakashi had worked with Ichi and he hadn't told him that. He also wanted him to drop the plot to get revenge on him. Why didn't you tell me? Sasuke was angry, on the brink of tears, and as a shinobi, this was very dangerous even with the both of them worn out. Kakashi was looking past Sasuke at the mask behind him as Sasuke slammed a fist into his chest and another, then another, till he stopped counting. Sasuke continued for a few minutes, struggling to catch his breath as he got slower and slower, but Kakashi made no move to stop him or plead with him. The reason why was that even with time Kakashi still couldn't bring himself to forgive himself for the path that Ichi ended going on. All their righteous missions resulted in many dead, whether they be innocent or not. In order to complete the mission, he could remember having to watch Ichi torture and kill someone in cold blood for the first time. Well, to him it looked like it because there was nothing about the ninja way in it. Ichi had practically blazed through all the tests and expectations that were set for them, and was pretty young when he had joined their secret order. The older Uchiha was gifted enough to hide his fears from Kakashi as he was trained, or the other Anbu chose not to acknowledge this, and either answer seemed possible. Kakashi wished he could go back and do more for Ichi, perhaps having led him away from the path he took as he watched him become groomed into a killer and was infected by the parasite of darkness. Danzo always spoke of darkness whenever he showed off the Anbu to enemies and even allies. Sasuke's sobbing was starting to die down as he stopped punching Kakashi. His white-haired sensei wrapped both arms around him as he let out a scream that was muffled by Kakashi's jacket. Do you still want to help him? Is that why you are telling me to abandon my mission, my purpose for still living? Sasuke said as he looked up at Kakashi with a firm glare filled with hatred. Kakashi opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted. Do you still consider him a comrade? No, I don't. Kakashi said, looking straight into his eyes. I responded to the screams after we received the news from across the village. Kakashi still had those same eyes even as he retold the story, the ones that seemed so lazy but yet fierce at the same time. He cut down some of our comrades as we got there, people that had taught him their knowledge in the hopes that he could take up the mantle and they could leave. Kakashi told him how they had been sent on a mission out of the village just before it happened and suspected that Ichi had planned this too. Well, that's what Kakashi told Sasuke. That's all he could handle for now. When we finally arrived at the Uchiha compound, I walked through bodies of fellow ninja, Anbu, and your clan. This made Sasuke's grip tighten on his clothes. Then I found you. Sasuke's breath hitched. He found me? Kakashi tried to sit up but Sasuke pushed him back down. What do you mean you found me? He shouted for the first time. Kakashi was surprised that it had taken him this long to do it and suspected that Sasuke had been doing his best to hold back his emotions despite the crumbling facade. Yes, I found you, he said, staring into his eyes. You were just walking aimlessly, injured past all that destruction that he left behind. Even when I was stood in front of you, I don't think you noticed me. Sasuke was doing his best to try and dredge up the memories of that night, the same ones he had tried so desperately to bury. The nightmares that those memories brought were always something he feared. Walking up in the darkness amongst a sea of bodies of his dead clan members as they all claw to grab him and pull him into their depths. He always thought Ichi should have at least killed him so that he could be with his clan, his parents, but Ichi had even denied him that simple pleasure. He was already gone when I got there, and even when I picked you up to take you to the hospital, the look on your face never changed. It haunted me to think of all that you had seen for someone of your age. He didn't want it to come through that he was referring also to Ichi. The glaze in your eyes then was. He didn't finish and would rather have left the rest unsaid because dumping all of this was a bit too much for Sasuke, but he would have had to do it eventually or the young Akaya would have found out, and he preferred to have things in order. There was a knock on the door which startled both of them, but they didn't move and just remained deathly still. After a minute or so another loud knock had come and Sasuke was wondering who it was, but Kakashi was more surprised than he was when he turned back. "No one dares approach my house so easily." Sasuke saw Kakashi trying to get up with a mixture of pained grunts and muscle twitches, but pushed him back down as he opted to get out of the bed instead. Kakashi wanted to protest, but in his current state there was little that he could do but hope for the best but prepare for the worst as he reached into his mask, pulling out another soldier pill. Playing with fire here. Sasuke still had his kimono on him even though it had been dirtied up during last night's venture. He reached for the door and heard a cough from Kakashi behind him. "Leave that door wide open," his sensei ordered, and Sasuke just nodded in understanding as he left the room with the door wide ajar and entered the hallway. He stared down at the front door just as another knock proceeded and started walking towards it, reaching for a kunai in his sleeves that he had snatched from Kakashi, or so he believed, but his sensei had decided not to notice as he took it. He wanted a firm confirmation on who was at the door before he got there, because even being a trained shinobi, no matter how much talent one had, there could always fall to a simple surprise attack. "Who's there?" he asked, voice slightly raised as he inched closer. "See, I told you she was home," came a very familiar voice, and Sasuke knew who it was as he let down his guard and walked to open the door. "Maiko," he said sternly, startling the girl, who started looking down shy. "And Karen, what are you doing here?" Karen let out a small chuckle. "Me, I was just waiting with Maiko here." And Karen wanted to continue, and he could see the cold glare emanating from Sasuke that he suspected was because of their intrusion. "I was just waiting with Maiko, but I'll see you later, Miss Sasuke," he said as he turned around and quickly left. Maiko finally looked up and saw how Sasuke looked. His hair was tangled and some of the kimono crumpled, and the yawn that he shortly let out all but confirmed what she thought. "Did I wake you?" Sasuke had already been up for a while but wanted to just get this over with and do anything else. "No, but I ask you again, what are you doing here?" Maiko shyly looked around as she sputtered out her answer. "Our sensei got injured pretty bad yesterday, so we don't have any training, so I was wondering if you could show me some new moves." He let out a huff and was about to give her the bins and tell her to scram till he heard a small creak of the door behind him and turned to see Kakashi now with his mask back up leaning against the door, giving him a quick nod. "Oh, Kakashi-sensei?" Maiko all but screamed and walked past Sasuke, inviting herself inside as if the most natural thing, but inside she was panicking. "Please don't hate, please don't hate, please don't hate me." Kakashi gave a small salute as Sasuke closed the door before walking off to the kitchen. "It's so good to see you, Kakashi-sensei. I tried to come and see you before, but you're never home." Kakashi tried to walk forward to meet her but felt his body refused to cooperate, so he just lazily leaned by the door and tried his best to look natural. "You know the life of a ninja, always busy," he said, earning himself a glare from the girl. "You're fine, but we had a really great training session with Miss Sasuke yesterday." Kakashi nodded sagely. "Oh really now?" and looked past her to Sasuke, who just looked back at him before giving a silent scoff and back to eating some leftovers he had found in the fridge. "Yes, it was hella painful. I still can't feel most of my body, and to think she does that all the time is so awesome. Not many kunoichis are that strong," she finished off with a big grin on her face. Sasuke kept eating his food and gave another glance at Kakashi, who met him with a sinister stare. "Why yes, it is very impressive. I can't wait for her to show me again." He nearly choked on his food and let out a strangled gasp and slapped his chest to try to alleviate some pressure on his chest. Maiko had already run to his side. "Are you okay, Miss Sasuke? Are you okay?" she said in a small panic. He raised one finger at her to keep her quiet as he took some steadying breaths. "As much I would like to train you today, Maiko, I think I am going to be very busy." Maiko titled her head to the side. "Are you training, miss?" He shook his head no and pointed across the room at Kakashi, thinking if his sensei was hurt he might as well use that to his advantage to get rid of her. "Kakashi got hurt yesterday too, so I need to take care of him." Sasuke turned to look at the girl and the look on her face wasn't the one he had hoped for. She looked gleeful. "Oh, I can help. I can help." He shook off the shock and went to another countertop. "Are you sure you can? And what about you, sensei?" Maiko looked up at the roof thoughtfully. "Oh, he is at the hospital, plus I can learn some new stuff from you," she said, giggling. The Uchiha looked over to Kakashi again as if asking for an out and was met with closed eyes. It was as if Kakashi had fallen asleep on his feet, and from the wounds that he saw on him and then his later use of the soldier pill, he suspected that it was probably exhaustion. Maiko followed his eyes to Kakashi as well. "Miss Sasuke, I can show you some home remedies if you want," she said shyly. To her surprise this time Sasuke didn't retort back. He was already tired himself and was not going to bother fighting to get her out anymore if she stayed out of the way, and she already seemed to know Kakashi. "How do you know Kakashi?" he asked as he walked towards him, and he opened his eyes to look at the Uchiha. "Funny story actually," Kakashi said through shaky breaths. "He was always around Grandma's place sometimes. Grandma said he stuck out so much that he was probably a very bad shinobi." "Is that so?" Sasuke said as he got to him. "Help me get him back into bed. This idiot doesn't know when to quit, just like another doby." The girl rushed to the other side of Kakashi and helped him up. Now that Sasuke thought about it, she was quite tall for age, and he knew because he had seen a lot of tall ninja present, company included. "It's either she is just taller or older than I originally thought." Maiko wanted to softly lay Kakashi down, but as they got to the bed, Sasuke all but threw him at it. Kakashi let out a pained groan as Sasuke theatrically rinsed off his hands in the air. "And that's for making me carry you last night." "Last night?" Maiko asked. He had forgotten she was there for a second in his own satisfaction as he turned to her. Oh yes, yesterday's mission." "Wait, you went to Miss Sasuke?" He gave a small nod, suppressing any hint on his face that he was lying. "After Kakashi returned we had another to go to, just the two of us, so that's why we are pretty worn out." He didn't want to admit that training with them had been pretty hard yesterday, and the subsequent trek with Kakashi afterwards hadn't given him much rest. "Oh, so that's why you didn't want to train?" she asked, and he replied with a nod. "Finally, now maybe you can get the hint and leave." "Then that means you're tired too, right?" He nodded yes, quite confused. "Okay then, please get in the bed while I prepare something." He wanted to protest, but she had turned around and left the room already as he let out an annoyed huff. "Leaving one for the other, I see," Kakashi said as all but a whisper. Sasuke knew what he meant. "No, actually she is quite skilled in some areas, some even more so than me." Kakashi didn't reply, just choosing to look up at the roof, and Sasuke could see his chest rise up and down, struggling against the probably heavy flak jacket. "You need to take that off." He saw Kakashi sit up, groaning as he went to unclip his flak jacket and letting out a groan with each movement, which was already getting on the Uchiha's nerves. "Shut it." "Fine, I'll do it myself," Sasuke silently shouted as he walked over to help Kakashi out of his gear. Kakashi had been fine to take it off on his own, but he was feeling a little bit lazy and rather chose to have his student do it. Ms. Sasuke, what do you eat? Miko's words caught in her throat as she saw Sasuke with his kimono loosely around him helping Kakashi out of his clothes. At least that's what it looked like. They both made eye contact as they both froze before Miko turned around and left the room. Don't worry about it, she said with a shaky voice, going back to the kitchen. Sasuke stood still there, then turned to look back at Kakashi, who looked back at him with a goofy grin on his face, trying to suppress a laugh. My, what do you think she thought she saw? It was a rhetorical question because he knew exactly how it looked. His fit of giggles was cut off by a heavy punch to the head. Ow, so you're stealing out of Sakura's book now too, Kakashi said, rubbing his head as he looked to the Uchiha to see him as if prepping to jump him. Sasuke quickly reined in control. The last thing he needed was Miko walking in and seeing him wrestling Kakashi. There wouldn't be an easy way to explain himself out of that. I'll get you after this, he said with a cold glare, but to Kakashi, it looked like a cute pout and he reached out to squeeze his cheek. Oh, I'm sure you will. Sasuke immediately tried punching him, but his fist was caught by Kakashi before being quickly let go. After a while of them exchanging banter back and forth, and with Kakashi now only being in his combat pants after they had to redress some of his wounds, Sasuke was just sitting watching him patch some parts of himself up, the ones the Uchiha had no knowledge on, but to him, he was just learning from watching. It's ready, Miko shouted from the kitchen, which immediately got Kakashi's attention as he stood up. He wavered a little, causing Sasuke to rush next to him and help him stand. I swear if this is a repeat of yesterday, there's gonna be hell to pay for. Kakashi chuckled before slowly starting to walk with his arm over Sasuke's shoulder. Stop, Sasuke said, causing his sensei to halt his walk before they got to the door. Here, Sasuke said as he took a random shirt in Kakashi's room and threw it at him. Oh yes. That makes sense, I'm not used to having guests. They walked out to find a kitchen filled to the brim with food they hardly recognized, and Miko immediately rushed in front of them with 2 cups of a liquid they both couldn't identify. Drink up, she said, practically forcing the drinks down their mouths already. Sasuke has been wanting to see how good your cooking was, Miko, Kakashi said with too much enthusiasm for Sasuke's liking. Really, she has? Mick was now looking at Sasuke expectantly, waiting for him to try out the first drink. It's just a dumb drink. Why are you so scared? He took the cup from her hands as it went to his lips, and he passed a sparring glance at Kakashi, who didn't seem even bothered as he drank his cup. After taking a large gulp, which seemed fine and had a hint of something that he didn't know, but he went for a full chug. Ms. Sasuke, you're not supposed to, Miko said a bit late after seeing Sasuke chug the whole thing down. Not supposed to what? He asked, giving her a deadly glare. Oh, nothing, she replied sheepishly, waving her hands. Do you have any more of this? Sasuke asked. There was something about the taste that gave him a craving for it. Yay, I made a whole barrel. A whole barrel? Kakashi asked, finally breaking from his ignorance. Yes, Miko replied, looking away at the window. Which recipe did you use? She let out a nervous chuckle. Grandma's one, of course. Kakashi knew what that meant. She had used liquor and he only had the very best stacked away in his house for a special occasion, so that's why there was all that rummaging. Let's just eat already. And Miko, Sasuke said, trying to test his new powers over his impromptu pupil, get me another drink. She gave him a bright smile as she turned back to go fill his cup. He felt a sharp pain in his ear. He knew it was Kakashi and he was going to ignore it till he couldn't and struck him in the stomach with an elbow jag. He heard a groan to Shay. They sat down and ate their food, drinking more and more whilst Miko gave Sasuke stories on the lower level missions that she had been going on. It was different for him as he saw her with a smile on her face talking about just simple farming and some animal capturing missions as the best thing in the world. Her team seemed happy just doing that, and a part of him understood why they took joy in such missions because it was simpler. Sasuke could never bring that type of joy into a mission because of all that was being carried on his shoulders. He even knew the Dobi was the same. Those missions to them always felt like roadblocks to their goals, whilst to others they were amazing. An hour later they were watching TV with Maiko sitting on the outside of the couch and not choosing to sit between them on her instance, and he knew what she was trying to do but just chose to ignore it. He had been drinking this home remedy of Maiko's for a while, was starting to feel very dizzy and weird in a way. He had looked at Kakashi and he was acting the same way. He already had caught on a little later that Maiko's home remedy had included alcohol, but how much of it she had put in they couldn't tell. It was odorless and barely strung at their throats, but Sasuke could see looking at Kakashi that it must have been a lot even if his sensei had drank not much of it. Maiko, who taught you how to make this? Sasuke asked, his words slurring a bit. She turned around, the smile on her face breaking a little. It was Grandma. After she stopped before looking away, but Sasuke already knew the implications. Someone must have died. He wanted to know what was going on, and in his more loosened straight he was already about to ask before she interrupted him. I'm sorry, Miss Sasuke. I've got to go for a little bit, she said, getting up and all but running out of the door. A stern look came to Sasuke's face as he was about to get up and chase her down, but his arm was grabbed and he felt himself land back on the couch with a heavy thud. Leave her alone for a bit, Kakashi said as he stared at Sasuke sitting next to him with a glazed look in his eyes. She's better at dealing with it than you think, but sometimes it randomly hurts when it hits you. Sasuke just stared at him. Are we still talking about Maiko, he thought before moving himself a little closer. This home remedy of his was making him bolder than he ever wanted, and it was causing all manner of thoughts to rush through his head. Sasuke looked closer at Kakashi's face as he sat next to him with his knee brushing at his thigh, and in his eyes Sasuke could see he was thinking the same thing. Sasuke could see the faraway look that Kakashi had talked about, except this time it was on him. He knew Kakashi's story for the most part. He had no one to be mad at or someone to seek vengeance against, so he just ended up going to the Anbu. Sasuke had already guessed that's how he thought to deal with his pain. He reached out his hand as Kakashi turned to look at him directly at what he was doing. He pushed some of Kakashi's hair out of the way and his hand reached the helm of Kakashi's mask, only stopping briefly to look up at him in his eye, but he made no move to resist. Slowly but surely Sasuke started to pull down the mask till it was around his neck before reaching up to stroke his cheek. He remembered how soothing it had been for him a few days ago, even if he wasn't in distress. Kakashi closed his eye, letting out a heavy breath he didn't know he had been holding, and felt some of his tension leave his body. They both knew the alcohol was starting to get to them. Kakashi already knew he was a lightweight when it came to alcohol, which is why he often only drank water when he was out with Guy, and he guessed from the look in Sasuke's pink cheeks he wasn't faring much better. Sasuke's hand kept stroking his cheek, but his thumb strayed as it went over Kakashi's lips. Their foreheads met as they looked into each other's eyes. They both knew what was about to happen. They knew in their drunken states they could barely resist. Kakashi was finally looking at Sasuke in a whole new perspective with his faded eye. He looked down at him, seeing his figure hugged by the kimono but some of it hanging off his shoulder. It had been so long since he let someone this close to him besides Rin. There had been others that tried to get close to him but that already felt risky, but this it felt different. It revived an old part of him he hadn't felt in years. Slowly Kakashi's hand touched his shoulder, with only Sasuke giving it a quick glance before looking back at him. They were having silent conversations and Sasuke took a small gulp before giving a shy nod. Kakashi saw that blush again that had been making him confused for a while now, but he knew what it was now. Sasuke felt the slow shove on his shoulder and went with it as he lay down on his back and looked up at Kakashi hovering over him with both hands resting against the sides of his head. He had never done this before, maybe accidentally with the dobi before, but even under the influence, he could tell this was different. Kakashi slowly started to close the gap between the two of them, no even bothering to close his eye. It had been a while since he had done anything like this, much rather preferring to read about romance than experience it. Their lips connected and he felt Sasuke go rigid and was waiting for the shoe to drop, but the Uchiha didn't retaliate, only letting out a huff that he seemed to have been holding in for a while. That had been Sasuke's first official kiss since he didn't bother counting the dobi, and as Kakashi pulled away with a look on his face that grazed his features and a small nosebleed, Sasuke let out a chuckle and Kakashi looked at him as if he had broken him till he felt it on his nose, quickly rushing to frantically wipe it off before he felt Sasuke's arms sling around his neck. He looked down at him and saw a smile gracing his lips, with his cheeks glowing a soft pink that he could guess was from the alcohol, and he probably thought he looked the same. Kakashi felt like a passenger in his own body, as it was coaxed back down by Sasuke, causing their lips to meet once more. The first time they both knew that they could have explained it as the alcohol, but now they were going for a second time, and Sasuke was no longer just a bystander kissing back Kakashi as fiercely as he could. They both didn't have much experience being intimate, and that much was clear by both their body language, but they just kept going with what felt right. Sasuke running his hands all over Kakashi's body and reaching under his shirt before wrapping around him. Kakashi leaned more down, pressing his body tightly against Sasuke as he laid on top of him, with one hand holding up his head and another scouring the Uchiha's body. Sasuke let out a moan which surprised even himself, but he didn't have time to waste on that thought, as the opening of his mouth was all that Kakashi had required to slide his tongue inside while eliciting more moans from him. He closed his eyes just as he felt the shoulders of his kimono be moved to the side, exposing them in the small sensations from having light kisses pressed there before returning to his lips. The Jonin's hand was now exploring the inside and outside of Sasuke's kimono, and by the way, he was reacting. He could tell the Uchiha was enjoying it. Every instinct inside of him was telling him to pull back for many reasons, and he could barely give any of them a thought as they were silenced by Sasuke's repressed moans that he was trying and sometimes failing to suppress from the pleasure he was feeling. Kakashi's lips parted from Sasuke's as he tried to sit up and get back to them as Kakashi went to shower his neck with kisses. The Uchiha felt shivers down his spine and something else against his inner thigh. It didn't take a genius to know what it was. Both of their eyes were heavy from the home remedy Miko had given them, and they could feel themselves fading slowly, the initial effects having been muted by all of the adrenaline no doubt rushing through their veins. Sasuke could feel Kakashi slowing down as he guessed he was probably much closer to passing out than he was guessing from the state he was in, which was worse than him. Kakashi looked at him holding Sasuke in his arms on top of him as the Uchiha sat up a little with his arms wrapped around his neck. They looked at each other breathlessly before Sasuke reached out his hand to grab the helm of Kakashi's mask that was around his throat. Kakashi made no visible movements, which surprised Sasuke even in his drunken state, but slowly he started to move the mask up to cover his face. He felt Kakashi's arm stop him as he was halfway and looked in his eyes, but he saw nothing, and maybe that was it. There was nothing except him. Only me and old lady Mizuno have seen his face. That's probably why he got to the answer rather quickly. Kakashi didn't want to cover his face up again. Well, at least now, he gave his Jonin a pinch on the cheek. I know, he said, and that seemed to do it as Kakashi let go and Sasuke proceeded to pull the mask up to cover his lower face. It always surprised Sasuke how many emotions Kakashi could convey with one eye and most of his features covered up, but he could see some of them at that moment. Shock, a certain nervousness that he never thought he would see from him, He ran a thumb over where he now knew that Kakashi's lips were under that mask before giving him a half smile as he laid back down, slowly closing his eyes. He felt the couch shift as Kakashi's weight settled next to him. He didn't know what he had just done, but this had just changed everything between them for the better or worse. Well, that was to be found out.